Have you ever wondered what lurks in the darkest corners of our world? Today we will delve into a mystical story full of secrets and unexplainable events. What power guards these secrets? Who or what lies within these chains of darkness? In this video, we will unravel the mysteries that have been stirring the minds of daredevils for centuries. Get ready for a journey full of unexpected twists and turns and revelations. Are you ready? Let's get started. The flames of the fire soar to the sky, the sound of a shaman's tambourine spreads through the neighborhood. The gypsy woman twirled in a ritual dance, her skirt swirling up, exposing her legs. Across from her stood a young girl with her eyes closed, possessed. The girl opened her eyes and the gypsy could barely contain her scream. Her eyes were completely black with no pupils. The woman looked thoughtfully at the spread of cards. The deck was battered, old, but it always gave true answers. And this time too. Tearing her gaze away from the layout, the woman rubbed the tip of her thick braid. She didn't want to get involved in this case, but she'd given her word that couldn't be broken, and who would help them if not her? Lachi went to the kitchen and brewed another cup of coffee for the night. She had reviewed almost all of her books and notes, consulted with an acquaintance, and had yet to see a solution. Lachi was a shovihani, a gypsy witch, highly respected in her community and beyond. She was often approached for help. She never refused, even knowing she was risking her life. But she had reliable friends in different spheres ready to help, and now she had to help a young girl to get rid of the ancient goddess of death and darkness. The only trouble is that shaman magic is strong. It is difficult to fight it. The essence of the goddess is taking more and more possession of the girl, and soon she will not be able to resist. Lachi must think of a way to help her and save her. The clock showed 3:30. Shovihani sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee. The apartment, as well as the whole house, was silent. The inhabitants of the human house were asleep. She sensed someone else's presence at once, without even seeing anyone. A man's silhouette appeared at the window, woven from the moonlight, the quiet chime of bells ringing through the kitchen. Lachi froze, not taking her eyes off the alien. "Who are you? What have you come with?" she asked curtly. "She belongs to the goddess, step back." The ghost whispered, "The goddess will destroy you." "There are many of you who want to do that." Lachi grumbled, "Thank you for the warning, now go away." "Back off." Lachi silently stared at the ghost, who vanished before her eyes. It's a dead end. If the ghosts are warning her, it must be serious. She did not get to sleep until morning, and her sleep was uneasy. First thing in the morning, she contacted the girl's father. "How is she?" After a brief greeting, "Not well. Sleeps little, hardly eats or speaks." "Only on the street she's lively," replied the girl's father. "Just outdoors? In the woods. We have a house outside the city, there is a nearby forest, that's where Aliona enjoys going. In the brief moments when she talks to me it gets creepy. She feels like a prisoner in the house, like a cage. She only speaks in the woods, where there are no people. I'm afraid for my daughter, what's happening to her? And you promised to help." "I didn't promise, I said I'd try." Lachi frowned. "The goddess has almost supplanted your daughter. Soon she will be gone." "What do you mean?" The man didn't understand. "The goddess will displace Alina's soul and take her place. For now she is learning, looking around, and she doesn't have that much strength yet. In the forest she gets the energy she needs. There's not much time left, we must hurry. Try to keep your daughter out of the woods for the next few days. I need time for the ritual, I'll call you. If anything happens, you call me too. Keep her out of the woods." Shovihani remembered where she had seen the description of the ritual, in her grandmother's notes. After reading the description of the ritual, Lachi dialed a familiar number. "Vika? Hi, listen, you once told me that you met a shaman in our town. Yeah, hi, she lives on Starokuznetskaya Street in a former communal apartment. I don't know where the dough came from. She seems to come out of nowhere, she's got a creepy look in her eye. She looks like she's looking into your soul and knows everything about you. She makes me uncomfortable. Vika, Lacha's friend, told me she saved her back in the day." "I? What's she doing?" "Rumor has it she's a hereditary shaman, works with the spirits of the clan, cleans houses and saves souls, that's all I know," Vika answered. "Put me in touch with her," demanded Lachi. "I don't want to get involved in your business." "You don't have to. Do you have her phone number?" Victoria dutifully dictated the numbers. "What's her name?" Lachi bragged. "Tatiana, I think. Shaman name. Kanga, wow." "Okay, I'll call you back later." Lachi hastily hung up the phone and dialed the numbers written on the sheet again. "Kanga! Wow! That name meant a blackbird, a crow, a strong name for a woman. Shovihani was curious to meet a shamaness with such a name. "I'm listening to you, girl," came the voice on the other end. It was young and ringing. "You didn't call for nothing, did you?" "That's right, I need to meet you, it's not a phone call. I think you have the address too, come on over." Lachi stopped the car in front of an old mansion in the old part of town. Once, back in Tsarist Russia, this building belonged to a merchant. During the war, it had been an orphanage for children from nearby villages. In the late 50s, in the former merchant's house, communal apartments were formed with all the consequences. High ceilings, a long gloomy corridor, a huge bathroom, and on the contrary, a very small kitchen. Kitchens were small in those days, but the dining room would be huge. And why would a cook need a lot of space? That's what the society ladies of the time thought. In a modern communal apartment, the former kitchen accommodates gas stoves, a couple of sinks, and one table, while the residents placed refrigerators and tables in their rooms. These communes existed peacefully for decades. The tenants became lifelong friends or irreconcilable enemies. There were arguments, fights, marriages, raising children and grandchildren, and a lot of things going on behind doors with dozens of bells. This was the kind of communal room Lachi had been in as a child with her grandmother. She couldn't remember well where they went, and why. The house was definitely this one, but she didn't remember the apartment at all. 15 years ago, the communal houses had begun to be dispersed, and rich locals had bought up huge areas. The gypsy stood in front of the massive oak door and listened to the trill of the bell, and after a couple of minutes, she heard hurried footsteps. The heavy door opened and a woman without age appeared in front of the girl, of the simplest appearance. "Come in, there's no need to entertain the neighbors." Lachi walked along the winding corridor, amazed at the size of the apartment. The landlady walked ahead without looking back. Everywhere traces of repair were visible. Paint cans, bags of putty stood on the floor of the corridor. At last, they came to a room with thick curtains that kept out the light. Kanga settled into a comfortable chair at the table. Lachi was offered a soft armchair. A few minutes later, the hostess brought a teapot and cups. Brewing the herbs, she poured the drink into the cups. Lachi smelled the herbs and couldn't tell what they were. "You know my name, what's your name?" "Lachi. I see you remind me of someone." Kanga shook her head. "Did you know my grandmother?" Lachi was amazed. "How old are you?" "Oh, I'm sorry. It's a compliment. I'm a lot of years old, but that doesn't matter. I remember you as a child when you had the force. I'm glad you didn't give up witchcraft." "There are fewer and fewer of us. Real witches, only tinsel and charlatans," said the shaman with bitterness. "What brings you to me?" Lachi told Alina's story in as much detail as possible and asked for help. Kanga was silent for a long time, thinking over the situation. Yes, it was a difficult situation. The girl's been through a lot, and there's no telling what state she'll be in when she comes back. I mean, mentally, I get it. But if we don't do something about it, Alina's chances are slim to none. "I'll help. Maybe this will be my last fight," said the shamaness. "Don't say that. We can handle it," objected Lachi. "Girl, I've lived a long full life, I don't regret anything. We are given to know a little ahead of the future." The woman smiled, and it was clear that Kanga was well into her 80s. The huge fire seemed to reach up to the sky, the loud crackling of logs breaking the oppressive silence. They had spent a lot of time searching for a suitable spot, and they had found one. The place was in fact unique: water, earth, fire, and air. The river seemed to wrap around a small forest on a hillside. It was like being on an island. In this forest they found a large, perfectly round clearing. They made a fire and waited. Kanga would enter a special state. She would go to the spirit world to summon the shaman who had made all this mess. While in the upper spirit world, Kanga will try to kick the goddess out of Alina's body. I, for my part, will keep her and Alina safe in the world of the living. "You will help me," Lachi told Alina's father. It was important for her to prepare him in advance. Alina and her father arrived in 3, with them was also a guard, Oleg, a trusted person. "Get ready," commanded the Shovikani. The shamaness and the Shovikani began the ritual. Kanga had the traditional attire of shamanesses with a tambourine in her hands and several amulets around her neck. She handed out similar amulets to the others. Light, smooth movements, the sound of the drum was mesmerizing. Kanga was gradually falling into a trance. Lachi was reading her spells by the fire. Alina sat on the ground with her hair loose, barefoot. The girl closed her eyes and seemed to be asleep. Suddenly, Lachi saw black silhouettes surrounding the clearing, more and more of them. The flames of the fire sizzled and almost went out as if splashed with ice water. The shadows were getting closer and closer. "Don't let the fire go out!" Lachi shouted to Alina's father. The man rushed to the prepared firewood, and together with the assistant, they were able to rekindle the fire. The grass, trees, and leaves in the clearing were covered with frost. The spirits of the lower world had entered their world. Suddenly Alina jumped up from the ground, and the rest happened so quickly that later no one could remember the course of events. Alina stood opposite the shamaness, on the other side of the fire. Her hair was fluttering as if in the wind, her eyes were still closed. She stretched out her hand and clenched it into a fist. At the same moment, an invisible force grabbed her by the throat and lifted her above the ground. Lachi was confused and stared dumbfounded at Alina for the first few seconds. The gypsy girl rushed at the girl, and the latter threw her away like dust. Lachi fell on her back, miraculously not breaking her face on a rock. The men froze in fear, not knowing what to do. "Watch the fire, or we'll all die." The gypsy saw what was happening to the shaman, but she couldn't do anything. Lachi sat down on the ground and took out a tiny vial from her pocket. With this potion, she would quickly enter an altered state and be able to help. Alina, that cheerful girl, tried her best to resist the goddess who was overwhelming her more and more. Lachi gathered her force and struck at the goddess. She could clearly see the predatory profile of the goddess. The blow had an effect. The goddess let go of the shamaness but weakened Lachi severely. Lachi collapsed and couldn't even lift her head. Kanga managed to hook the essence of the goddess, and together with the deceased shaman who started it all, gradually kicked out of Alina's body. Alina screamed terribly and fell to the ground. She didn't move and looked like she was dead. Kanga circled around her like a bird of prey. The girl suddenly began to convulse, her back arched, her heels hitting the ground. Her father held her as best he could, while his assistant kept the fire burning. After a few moments, everything quieted down. Kanga looked around, sniffing. Lachi circled in place as well, for she sensed another's dark presence, one that had no place in the world of the living. The shamaness pulled out a strange black powder with a matte sheen from her kit set. After thinking for a moment, the shamaness blew the powder into Alina's face. Before everyone's eyes, a dark shadow separated from Alina and entered Kanga. The old shamaness screamed and grabbed her knife and looked at Lachi. "Goodbye!" A sharp swing and silence. The clearing became quiet, only the crackle of the fire breaking the dead silence. The shadows were gone to their lower world. The old shamaness Kanga finished her earthly journey in the forest glade. Alina came to her senses, and it became clear that she had a problem with her head. Just as Kanga had warned, there would be mental problems. Lachi lay exhausted on the ground, looking up into the vast, dark sky. Lachi held on as they waited for the ambulance and the police. The police didn't show much zeal and left, as if they hadn't noticed anything. Alina's father put her in an expensive private enclosed clinic for mental illness. The doctors have the most hopeful prognosis. Kanga's death had a profound effect on Lachi. She felt as if she had lost a loved one again. Surprisingly, the Shovakani at the morgue gave her the body of the shaman without any problems. Lachi had arranged a secular funeral and even put a monument in the cemetery afterward, but the real funeral was held according to the ancient rite of Uradan. The shamanka was buried in an aerial way, on 4 piles. Poles, a platform was arranged, on which the box with the body was placed. The so-called arangas was arranged in a deep forest, far from people's dwellings, and the places there were remote and untraveled. For 3 years Lachi went to Kanga's grave, and after that, she sealed all the paths to the arangas with sorcery. After 3 years one must not come to the grave of the shamaness, or the spirit will be angry and punish her. Lachi has always kept in her heart this amazing woman who sacrificed herself for another person.